So it's about a church, St Augustines Church, and I'll start off straight away with it. I'll share the screen. Well, this is it's something that I didn't think it would take me the way it has. It just led me in very interesting directions, for me anyway. Basically, this church is in All Saints Square in Manchester. It's now surrounded by MMU buildings, Manchester Metropolitan University buildings. But I remember it quite well because as my mum got older, this was her favourite church, and she used to go there every Sunday, even though there was very few who lived nearby, but it had a very faithful following of Catholics who went there. And I remember they had Christmas fairs, and I helped out with that. And when my father died, his Requiem Mass was given there. But I always thought, what a sort of dour place it was. You have a look at it. So, but I've just read a piece about this church by a guy who I've never heard of, Adam Brocklehurst, who publishes with Adamah Media, which is actually chaired by a Catholic priest who's in the Catholic chaplaincy at the Manchester University. So it's a very local thing. And he only came out with this article earlier, in April, this April. And what he did, he actually did a really interesting analysis. Actually, it doesn't look like St Augustine's, it looked like St Augustines. I didn't notice that. Oh, and it's not a church, it's a church. And in a way, sort of going back, if I can, I've called it a tribute to Desmond Williams, Robert Brumby, and Pierre Fourmaintraux. And I'll come on to why that's the case. So if you see the external part of it, it's even got speed bumps in front of it now, I see. It's a little cul-de-sac, but it's actually got a very interesting history. It tells you a lot about the Catholic community and its growth in Manchester. And also, it is actually, now that I look at it through the eyes of Adam Brocklehurst, an amazing church for a variety of reasons. So I just wanted to try and go through that with you. So it was designed by Desmond Williams, who was known for fairly innovative urban churches. And it was constructed between 1967 and 1968. And it was what they call the post-war late modernist period in design, not just including churches. So he was keen on functionalism over unnecessary decoration and using what they called honest building materials, in this case, just sort of brown bricks, which exposed the construction, how it was made, and the natural light. Anyway, by the way, St Augustine, as I'm sure Jackie will probably know, is the man responsible for converting England to Christianity in the 6th century. The apostle to the English, as he's known. There's another picture of it. Must have been taken at a slightly older period because we've got the full name at the top. No, actually, it seems to be in a different format. But there you can see it's a pretty straightforward building. It's on the other side of Oxford Road, those who know Manchester, where the 8th Day Cafe is. And something I'd like to suggest, I probably have no takers on it, is after you've heard this, is to try and get this Adam Brocklehurst, who lives locally, I think, to give us a tour of the building. And we could then go to the 8th Day, which is my favourite cafe, vegetarian cafe in central Manchester. Anyway, just a thought. Be very easy.
Oh,
I'm up for that. That sounds good.
You're up for that? Yep. Okay. Well, let's think.
I'm up for that.
Good. Anyway, so its style, according to Adam, has its roots in Art Deco and people like Le Corbusier and the Bauhaus, and is also a cousin to what is known as the Brutalist movement. I mean, there's a famous Brutalist motorway cafe on the M6. I don't know if you've gone through between Birmingham and the part of the M6 is leading up to the M1. And it's maybe brutalism is where a lot of modern church architecture gets traditionalists, both religious and scholarly ones, so annoyed and so upset. There is no ecclesiastical or artistic baggage attached to the architecture, which would enable us, which will fill our need to cling to the recognizable. We know what a church should look like. This doesn't look like a church should look like. And I took that on. I thought when I went to Wexford, oh, what a boring old building, you know, and sort of dismissed it a bit, I think. And it's actually, this has really changed my mind. So there's no neo stuff, no neo-Gothic, no neo-Georgian, no neo-Italianate. It's a building of its time. Now, it's also got a history in that St Augustines is one of the oldest Catholic churches in Manchester. Only St Chad's, which is pictured here in Cheetham Hill, 1773, and St Mary's in Mulberry Street, 1794, are older. And all three were founded by a guy called Father Rowland Broomhead. So, and it's, you know, so it's the origins are in the 1770s. Now at that time, being a Catholic, of course, was illegal. But the person who's known as the Apostle of the North, this is the Reverend Rowland Broomhead, in looking rather dandyish in the cover of the book about him, and a bit more well, a bit more well filled out in the second picture. He was born into a recusant Catholic family in Sheffield. Does everybody know what a recusant was or is?
No. No.
It actually means somebody who refuses to attend a Church of England service. It doesn't define you as a Catholic. It defines you somebody who's not doing that. So the recusants, what happened with Catholicism after Henry VIII, being a Catholic could lead to your death. But as time went on, it got frayed at the edges. That they didn't legalize it actually fully until the 19th century. But there was the first Catholic Relief Act, which was called the Papists Act, which allowed Catholics to join the army and purchase land if they took the oath of allegiance. So it's a bit like, you know, how when Clinton did with the issue of gay servicemen and says, don't ask, don't tell. It was a bit like that. As long as you kept quiet about it, as long as you didn't make a fuss, you could get on with a fairly normal life. And this was only from, this happened during Rowland Broom's lifetime. It was the act was in the 1770s. So the climax of his life was the opening of the new St Augustines in Granby Row. And this is a picture of it. It was actually, there was a school underneath it with for 1,000 pupils, which how they fit in underneath the church, I don't know. Anyway, his funeral, when he died, he was so important that there were thousands and thousands at his funeral as the cortege passed through. And at the time of his death, the congregation in Manchester had increased from 300 to over 3,000 and 20,000 in the larger area. So he was a very successful and much loved. He also got involved in joint initiatives for the poor, together with the nonconformists and other and also some of the more central C of E people. So there was obviously beginning to be a coming together of the various religions, and Catholicism wasn't seen as such a threat. So it eventually was it was demolished in 1905 to make way. It was in Granby Row, near where Umist is now, and this one was, the second one was in York Street. And here you can see there is a picture on the right of children playing in the wreckage of it, because, well, it was built in 1908, and it's near where the Mancunian Way is now, where the National Computing Centre used to be, around there, if ever anybody knows Manchester. It's only lasted for 32 years because it was destroyed in the Blitz in Christmas 1940. And there you can see children playing in its ruins. And Father George Street, who was in the church at the time, was killed. And Lowry later painted a picture of the destroyed church a few years later as well, which is still there in 1945. And these are plaques that are in the main building of the new church, which I never took the time to actually read it when I was in it. But what it's doing is telling you the history of the churches before this was itself was built in the 1990 post World War II. So it was a montage about the two preceding ones. And what it also showed, so there was the first site in Granby Row, the second site in York Street, and the third site in Grosvenor Sq. It actually set up in an existing chapel, what was called a Chapel of Ease at St Augustines, which is just around the corner. And that it also housed the early version of St Bede's College, which is a school which then went to Alexandra Park, and which I attended. So there's a link to my school there as well. So it started in that, and they used the existing building for a while, and then they got the new one designed in 1968, and it was made in 1968 by Desmond Williams. This is unfortunately only the best picture I can get of it. It's a collage in one of the side chapels, and it's made from the chalices crushed in the destruction of the York Street Church. You can see at the bottom there, there's one of the chalices. It's very much a 3D. It's a sculpture really, but it's a memorial plaque, and it commemorates the earlier parish church which this replaced. Now let's get on to the church itself. So the three people, as I said, there was the guy who designed the church. There was Bob Brumby, who was responsible for all the various sculptures that are there, for the external plaque and statue, the holy water stoops, the wall light brackets, the circular font, the aluminium altar table, and stations of cross sculptures. He did the lot. But most of the glass fittings were done by, and this is a third character, which is Pierre Fourmaintraux, who was a specialist in radical new stained glass design. So this is some features of the Bromby Christ in Glory, it's called. And it's called Christ in Majesty by Robert Brumby. And it's a reredos sculpture. Have anybody heard of a reredos? Reredos.
Yes.
You have?
Most churches, old churches have one, yes.
You want to tell us what it is?
It's at the back behind, well, it's the thing behind the altar.
That's exactly what it is. It's
screen.
An ornamental screen or partition.
They're often wood carved.
Yeah, but this one isn't. It's kind of slate, isn't it? And things. It's not directly attached to the altar table, but is affixed to the wall behind it. From the old French areredos, from arere behind and dos back, from the Latin dorsum. I looked it up because I'd never heard of it before. We all learned something.
Oh, that's.
Anyway, according to Adam Brocklehurst, in my opinion, this work is one of the greatest sculptural religious art anywhere. It is simply world class. The naturalism of Brumby's handling of the thousands of individual ceramic components is quite staggering. Each piece.
How long did that take to make? Because, you know,
it's amazing, isn't it? I've seen that so many times and I've never really looked at it. I'm ashamed of myself really doing that, but it's very rare to read a piece of written work that changes your mind radically about something, and this one has. And I'm determined to go back and have another proper look at it, and maybe get somebody, as I said, if he could show us around and discuss it, would be brilliant. This is his description of it. His altarpiece appears like a shattered megalith, an open stratum of slate exposed by a landfall and washed clean by rain. What he's perhaps saying, considering that this church replaced one bombed in a time of war, is that the trauma of a break can be shifted into something elemental, something infinitely more beautiful than what existed before. He is a triumph of realism, an antidote to the mawkish indifference of repetitive Victorian and Edwardian, figurative, classically derived representations of the Messiah. This representation is not to everyone's taste, One friend sees the building as a box and struggles with what he describes as the intense owl-like eyes of the sculpture and the rectangular formless of the body. But that's fine. People can have different views. There's nothing wrong with that. Here is another of the pieces, which is a sculptural cross, which is on it as well, which I never noticed. And I think it's now onto the stained glass. So the internal view of the church is modified by the changes in light cast by the stained glass windows. They've got random abstract designs and ascend the full height of the walls. The pieces of coloured glass are suspended in concrete and were supplied by the Whitefriars Company, which no longer exists. The designer was Pierre Fourmaintraux, who began his work in 1959 using the dalle de verre slab glass technique that had been developed in France between the wars. There you can see it in one of the, and to him, he says, in his usual rather flowery language, to me, the glass represents a panorama of Golgotha, Christ's place of torture and death, repeated in cycle, a sea of repeated crosses, bent and blackened, stark against a tormented sky. Good stuff, isn't it?
Yes.
This is a picture of Pierre Fourmaintraux in the studio examining one of his works. It's the only picture of him I could find anywhere. That's him on the left. And this is not one that's in the church. He did several. This is at the this is from a wall behind the Book of Remembrance in Port Talbot, a chapel of rest in the Margam Crematorium. I mean, look at that. It's stunning, isn't it? I think it's stunning.
It's absolutely lovely.
It's fabulous.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is better as an individual piece than any of those that are in the St Augustines, but it just gives an indication of how important a stained glass designer he was. This, I thought, yeah, go on.
Looks like resurrection, doesn't it? You know, that swirl and sort of going up.
Yes, yes.
As though that's what it's meant to be, really.
Yeah,
or the light of the world.
Yes,
I can see a face in the centre, but then that's me.
Yeah,
it reminds. Don't you think it's reminiscent of the Catholic cathedral in Liverpool?
Yeah.
You know, this type of use of glass.
Yes, yes.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Anyway, so this is an interesting photograph. It's actually taken from inside the church, looking onto All Saints. It's only a small park, and on the road there is at the end on the left is the Eighth Day shop and restaurant. So you can see, and it's surrounded. The building is surrounded now by buildings from Manchester Metropolitan University, which is where I taught. I parked here many times and ignored what was going. I just thought it was an interesting take on the stained glass that you can look out through it as well. As well as that, there's these sort of skylights, which also give a remarkable sense. Look at that as a picture of lighting. I'd never have thought of taking it in the dark like that. It's fabulous, isn't it? And yet again, something I never really noticed. Here's another one of there you can see the stained glass and how it works in the church, which I think is a very good portrait of it. And here's another one of the Rev'd ceramic wall piece. And again, and this is his views on this. Christ in glory is confident. He challenges us, questions our preconception of what it means to be Christian, what it is to be a church. He invites us to reevaluate ourselves in relation to him. St Augustines were built in the era of the battle for civil rights and female liberation, of the struggle to remove the shackles of imperialism under the cloud of the Cold War Soviet Union, and the need to both demolish walls, both literal and figurative. Christ in glory is an activist, a reformer, a turner of tables, an embodiment indictment against what many believe to be increasingly moribund hierarchies within the Catholic Church, with its opaque liturgical practices and an alienation between people and the world. So I just wanted to share that with you because I was really taken aback by it. When something really challenges your established view of something, and even though you don't go necessarily the whole way with them, it's a journey worth taking. Anybody got any comments on that?
Sorry, go on, Maureen.
No, I was married in the church that was before this one. I was married in 62. So it was a totally different shape church.
Was it a Catholic church?
Well, Johnny was Catholic, but also they had an Italian priest sharing at that church. So it meant they could do it in English and in Italian. So that was why we chose that. But All Saints has been part of my life while growing up, because I went to the school, the secondary modern school, across, well, to the left of that.
Yes, was that St Margaret's? Was that?
No, that I didn't go to a Catholic school.
No, it wasn't. What was the church that was there? There was a Protestant.
Actually, it was called the Little Holy Family.
Little Holy Family, all right. Yeah.
Well, that was the name it sort of was known by,
yeah.
And we always thought it was like a little sister to the big St Augustines that was facing Manchester Uni, you know, the refectory building there, that big one.
Oh, the Holy Name, yeah.
The Holy Name, so that's still there. But that was interesting, just seeing that, and because I was married 62, and then that was put up in 1970, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go.
There you go.
Bill, you wanted to say something?
Well, just what you've done is just fascinating. I'd never thought of going in. It looks absolutely fantastic, and the way you presented it was brilliant. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what is interesting to me as well is that it tells you a lot about the growth of the Catholic community in Manchester. And interestingly, the first priests all in the 18th century all had very English names. They weren't Irish. It was only 19th century that the Irish diaspora really got going in Manchester, with initially with textile workers, and then after the famine, the 1840s. And of course, many of us in Manchester are descended from that. My mother's name is Geraghty, and so she was a very devout Catholic and part of that. It's made me realise I don't know enough about Catholic history of Manchester Catholics, where I know far more about the Jewish community in Manchester than I do about the Catholic community, because my friend Bill Williams, his whole academic career was based on looking at the Jewish community, and very interesting it is. But I'm determined to do more on that now that I've seen that. It's
I think a lot of people, Catholic people, arrived when they built the ship canal, because a lot of the navigators, the navvies, were all of Irish descent, and a lot of them settled in Manchester. And
yes, of course,
Manchester's not quite as high as Liverpool, of course, but it has a very, very high percentage of people with some kind of Irish heritage
connection. And
because ever since I was at school, I saw myself as English origin, and it was vastly dominated by the St Bede's, by its Irishness.
Yes,
some of us who were a bit sort of, a bit snotty about it, looking back, when it was St Patrick's Day, oh look, another bunch of weeds, everybody's got a lapel and things like that. So I was never that proud of my Irish ancestry, but I think I'm going to try and reclaim it a bit more now.
Well, I've got an Irish grandmother. Well, I had an Irish grandmother as well. My father's mother was Irish. Teresa Mannion, yeah.
Oh, so, Mannion, that's a good Catholic.
Is that good, Teresa? Yes.
What about you, Derek? Have you got any Irish background? Or you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you sort of identified then with the English side. I mean, we came from a split family, with the orange and the green, and my mother's family were the Clearys, and like Jackie, I saw the similarities between some of the stuff and indeed the building at the time, because I think what they called Paddy's Wigwam, the Catholic cathedral, was completed in the 60s, wasn't it?
Yes.
You know, but it's interesting that you get your view from, you know, your identity from the English and the ruling classes, where I identify always with Ireland against England, and you know, the rebelliousness and you know, and the stuff around. I mean, you've mentioned the famine and stuff like that. So you know, I'm quite interested in the Irish perspective. I wasn't brought up as a Catholic. My mum and dad did a deal. My dad insisted we went to the state schools, and because the priest used to visit my mum, we were all baptized Catholics, you know. So they still had, you know, that piece of water was put on my head. But I was never brought up a Catholic. I went to the local schools, and when I passed 11 plus, I went to a Church of England school. But the time I can remember where the Catholic Church was significant was when a gang was chasing me, and I went into some, what was it called? I think it was called St Michael's, the local church, and I immediately thought, what do you do? You know, I could see all the candles and everything, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm going to be spotted here. And so I watched the other people, and I went down on my knees you know, in front of a candle. But none of the boys who were chasing me came into the church, so I was okay. You know.
I used to love in Catholic church. I was a great believer in all the incense and smells and everything, which is lovely. And I remember my friends saying, because I got very interested, became a Tibetan Buddhist for a long while. And they said, typical, you had to go to the form of Buddhism that's most like Catholicism, you know, because it's lots of incense and things in that as well.
Smells and bells.
Smells and bells, yeah.
Yeah, my dad actually was studying to be a priest from age 12. His father, my grandfather, was Irish. It came over. And he was a carpenter, and my father was put under a great deal of pressure as the only boy to go, and he went to Ushaw College in Durham. But because they have such strict regulations like the Army and the Navy, he got rheumatic fever at the age of 14 and was thrown out of the seminary because they said he wasn't fit to be a priest, and that put a huge cloud over him for the rest of his life, where he felt
That's awful.
He let down everybody. But if he hadn't, you know, the rest of us Connors wouldn't have existed. But it was astounding how the church had such a hold on the social effect of Catholicism.
Yeah.
Not just the religious effect. And when the process of the Mass was translated into the vernacular, so many people said, I don't like this because I can understand what we're saying now. And they preferred the Latin Mass because it gave them a sense of comfort.
Well, it was beautiful as well.
Well, absolutely. I mean, when you're although as altar boys, the particular priests we had got it beaten into us, you know, it's cum spiritu, oh, have you got it now, you nasty little boy? That's the kind of, I mean, that is true. I'm not over exaggerating. You know, we're all knelt in front of the priest. And if he had only just explained all the process, and it was, I mean, from a linguistic point of view, it was a fantastic process.
And I like the way at the most important point of the Eucharist, where they drop from Latin to Greek, ancient Greek, Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison.
Kyrie eleison.
No, there's something. It seems to. I think it's quite successful. Makes you think it's a deeper moment. But I'm going to end it now, and then see you soon. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers,
Thank you.
Bye.